My name is Leo Washington. I'm 29 years old. I live in a modest apartment complex in a quiet suburb just south of Salt Lake City, and by all accounts, I'm a pretty ordinary person. I teach high school English. I'm not particularly loud or the center of attention at faculty meetings. Most days I get home, grade some papers, maybe watch a documentary or get lost in a novel, and then I turn in for the night. My life runs on a predictable, comfortable rhythm. I've lived in the same apartment for the last 4 years. The people in my building recognize me enough to offer a nod or a brief hello in the mailroom, but we don't really socialize. I've always appreciated the calm and the consistency of it all, or at least I did until a few weeks ago. Working in the same department is Clara Evans. She's 30, with a striking intelligence in her sharp blue eyes and a kind of quiet intensity that surrounds her. She's been in a long-term relationship with Paul Harrison, a history teacher from the department down the hall. He's a few years older, maybe mid-30s, and they've been the school's established couple for as long as I've worked there. I'd exchanged professional courtesies with them over the years, but I can't say I knew them well. They were a unit, always seen together at school functions. Paul was the type of man who seemed to command any room he entered, always ready with a joke or a confident opinion. Clara, in contrast, possessed a composed presence that was intriguing, even if you only spoke with her for a minute about curriculum standards. Last Tuesday I found a letter. It was the end of the day, and I'd gone to my faculty locker to grab my jacket. Tucked inside, lying on a stack of textbooks, was a folded piece of notebook paper. It wasn't in an envelope, just creased into a small square. Thinking it was a note from a student, I opened it. But it wasn't. It was a love letter, raw and poetic, full of a desperate, beautiful longing. It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. I'd seen it on countless student essay rubrics. It was Clara's. The next day, just as I was packing up after the final bell, she appeared at the door of my classroom. Her posture was tense. She stood there in a simple grey dress, her blonde hair tied back neatly, her eyes looking tired and worried. She was holding a worn copy of a poetry anthology. "Hi, Leo," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think you might have something of mine." Naturally, I invited her in. I gestured towards the student desk in front of my own and cleared a stack of papers away. I didn't ask any questions right away. I sensed she would explain when she was ready. She sat down, placing her hands in her lap and staring at the worn cover of the book she'd brought, as if it held all the answers. After a stretch of heavy silence, she finally spoke. "The note in your locker," she murmured, not looking at me. "It wasn't meant for you. It must have fallen out of my bag. Our lockers are right next to each other." I nodded, telling her she didn't have to explain. We just sat there for a moment in the quiet of the empty classroom, the silence punctuated only by the distant sounds of the janitor's buffer in the hallway. The situation should have been painfully awkward, but strangely, it felt more like a shared, fragile truce. After a while, she began to talk about the letter, about how it was just something she wrote for herself, a way to process things. She spoke about how her relationship with Paul wasn't always what it seemed, how over the last few years a chasm had grown between them, how she sometimes felt more like a part of his life's scenery than a partner. She wasn't crying. It was more like she was allowing the truth to seep out, slow and steady, like rain from a saturated cloud. She finally looked up at me and said, "I know it sounds terrible, but I feel like I'm in a constant state of hoping for something that isn't there anymore. It's a different kind of loneliness." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just listened, offering a simple nod. That seemed to be all she needed. Before she left, she glanced around my classroom at the posters of authors and the stacks of books, and she offered a faint smile. "It's peaceful in here," she commented, and then she was gone, heading back into the empty halls. But something had shifted between us. The morning after Clara came to my classroom, I couldn't focus on a single thing. I had lesson plans to finalize, essays to grade, department emails that needed responses, but my mind was completely occupied by the image of her sitting at that desk, her voice so quiet and her words so heavy. I don't know what it was, but the way she spoke, with such unguarded honesty, had burrowed under my skin, not in an unsettling way. It just resonated. By lunchtime, I hadn't eaten anything. I was staring blankly at a student's analysis of The Great Gatsby. For the third time, when I heard a soft knock on my open classroom door, I looked up, and she was there again. This time she was dressed more casually in jeans and a simple white blouse, no pretense, no professional armor. In her hands she held 2 brown paper bags from a little cafe down the street. "I figured you might skip lunch," she said with a tentative smile. "I almost did. I brought you a sandwich if you want it." She didn't wait for my response, just stepped inside as if it were a natural thing to do, and for some reason it felt completely right. We ended up in the school's small, deserted courtyard. The sky was overcast and grey, but the air was cool and crisp. She handed me a roast beef sandwich, and we both just sat there on a cold stone bench, quietly unwrapping our lunch. We didn't speak for the first few minutes, and I didn't feel the need to force conversation. She took small, deliberate bites, her gaze fixed on the rows of manicured hedges that lined the far wall, as if she were a million miles away in her thoughts. Eventually, she was the one who broke the silence. "It's so strange," she began, her voice low. "I thought I would feel guilty for writing something like that, for feeling that way. I thought I should be ashamed, but mostly I just feel tired, like I'm acting in a play about my own life." I glanced over at her, but she kept her eyes on the distant hedges. "I've had this weight on my chest for so long, Leo, even before I wrote that letter. It's like the disappointment started years ago, when we stopped really listening to each other." I let her speak, not interrupting. I just sat there, providing a space for her words. She sighed, a deep and weary sound. "We used to be so connected. I truly loved him, but then his career became everything. He'd come home later, his mind was always somewhere else. He talked less about us and more about his ambitions. I started having dinner by myself. Even on nights he was home. We shared a house, but it felt like we were living on different planets." She finally turned to look at me, her blue eyes clear but holding a deep weariness. "Have you ever felt like you were becoming invisible in your own life?" I gave a slow nod, not because I'd experienced that exact situation, but because I understood the profound loneliness she was describing. I think everyone does, in their own way. There was a pause, and then she let out a soft, almost self-conscious laugh. "I'm so sorry. I didn't intend to unload all of this on you. There isn't anyone else I can talk to about it." "You don't have to apologize," I said sincerely. "Sometimes you just need someone to listen." She gave me a look that was grateful, and maybe a little surprised. For the next hour, our conversation shifted. We didn't talk about Paul or the letter anymore. We talked about small, simple things, classic films, our favorite novels to teach, the best coffee shops in the city. I told her about the time I tried to brew my own beer, and it ended up exploding in my kitchen closet. She laughed at that, a genuine, unrestrained laugh, and for that brief moment, she looked like someone who wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. At one point, as we were packing up our trash, her hand brushed against mine as we both reached for a napkin that had blown away. It lingered there for just a second, a brief point of contact that was long enough for both of us to register it before she gently pulled her hand back. Her expression shifted, a flicker of something. Maybe guilt, or perhaps just confusion. "I should go," she said abruptly, getting to her feet. This is probably inappropriate. I don't want you to think I'm just using you as a sounding board. I stood up as well. You're not, I said, and I meant it. She hesitated by the courtyard gate. I just didn't want to be alone with my thoughts today. I nodded. Then don't be. Anytime you need to talk or just sit in silence, my door is open. There was a profound weight in the quiet that hung between us then, as if neither of us wanted to put a name to what was happening, but we both felt it. A change, a connection, a warmth that neither of us had anticipated. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Leo, really. Then she turned and walked back toward the main building. I watched her go, her shoulders seeming a little less slumped than before. Something had definitely changed. I couldn't fully articulate it, but I knew we had crossed some invisible boundary. Nothing physical had truly happened, no grand confession. But still, an unspoken understanding had begun to form between us, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to just fade away. The next day started quietly. It was a grey morning, the kind where a heavy mist hangs over the mountains and promises rain later. I sat at my desk before the first bell, a lukewarm cup of coffee in my hand, attempting to review my notes for the day's lessons. But my focus was shot. My thoughts kept drifting, circling back to Clara. It wasn't just that she had sought me out again. It was the feeling of it, the ease of our conversation despite the heavy topic. Her presence lingered with me longer than I would have expected. I couldn't shake her words, or the way she'd looked at me with that complex mixture of pain and trust. And then there was that fleeting moment, the simple brush of our hands, but it had imprinted itself on my mind like something far more significant. Sometime during my second period class, I glanced up and saw her walking down the hall. I wasn't looking for her, at least that's what I told myself, but there she was, pausing near the water fountain, her arms wrapped tightly around her midsection as if she were trying to hold herself together. She looked so isolated, so uncertain, like someone standing at a crossroads, terrified of which path to take. 10 minutes passed, then 15, and then, during my planning period, came the familiar soft knock. I knew it was her before I even looked toward the door. Clara stood in the doorway in a dark green sweater that seemed a size too big and a simple black skirt. No makeup, no jewelry, just her. She looked utterly exhausted, but her eyes held a quiet intensity, as if she'd spent the entire night wrestling with a difficult decision. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. "Of course," I said, stepping aside without a second thought. She walked past me and over to the same student desk she'd sat in before, but she moved more slowly this time, with a hesitation that hadn't been there yesterday, as if she were questioning her own right to be there. I didn't press her. I just stood for a moment, watching her scan the room as if the posters on the walls might offer some sort of guidance. "I wasn't going to come here," she said after a moment, her voice thin. "I've been arguing with myself about it for hours, but I didn't know where else to turn." "You don't need a reason," I told her gently. Clara sank into the chair, curling into herself like someone trying to take up as little space as possible. I sat in the chair beside her this time, closing the distance a little. It was quiet for a bit, just the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant chatter of students in the hallway. "I don't know how to do this," she said finally, her voice cracking as she broke the silence. "I went from my parents' house to my college dorm to living with Paul. That's my entire adult life. There was always someone else there. Now the thought of being alone is terrifying, but the thought of staying is worse." I nodded slowly. "That's a hard place to be." She let out a shaky breath. "The thing is, I've felt alone for years, even with him right there. It's like I was already mourning the end of our relationship long before I could even admit it to myself." Her words were heavy with a truth she had clearly carried for a long time, and I could tell it cost her something to say them out loud. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "That kind of loneliness can be the worst kind," I said. "It's one thing to be physically alone, but it's another thing entirely to feel alone when someone is sitting right next to you." She looked at me then, her gaze direct and searching. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "Do you think it's wrong that I'm here? That I'm telling you this? It feels like a betrayal, but it also feels like the only honest thing I've done in months." I took my time answering, wanting to choose my words carefully. "No," I said firmly. "I don't think there's a rule book for this kind of thing. Sometimes people show up in our lives right when we need to be seen. That doesn't make it wrong." Her eyes softened, as if she had been holding her breath, waiting for my judgment. "I just never expected to feel a connection with someone else right now," she whispered. "Neither did I," I admitted. Then she looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the cuff of her sweater. "I have to go back to that house tonight, and I'm dreading it. Not because I'm afraid of him, but because I can't sit across from him at the dinner table and pretend anymore. I feel like I'm going to suffocate." I could hear the genuine panic in her voice. It wasn't melodrama, it was the sound of a woman who had reached the absolute end of her rope. I didn't really know what to do, what to offer. The situation was so much more complicated than the one in the original script. She couldn't just stay in my guest room, but the emotional beat was the same. She needed an escape, a safe harbor. "You don't have to pretend," I said quietly. "Maybe you just need a neutral space for a while, a coffee, shop, a library, anywhere but there, just for a few hours, to breathe." Clara blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "I didn't expect you to understand." "You're not losing your mind, Clara." She nodded slowly, and for the first time that day, a tiny, fragile smile touched her lips. Later that afternoon, after the final bell, she came back. She didn't say anything, just stood in the doorway, looking lost. We didn't talk much. I put on some quiet music while I graded papers, and she sat and read a book she'd grabbed from my shelf. The silence felt natural, a comfortable quiet that was a world away from the suffocating silence she described at home. Before she left to finally face the evening, she came over to my desk. No drama, no big emotional scene, just a quiet proximity. "Thank you, Leo," she said softly. "For this, for not asking too many questions, for making me feel like a real person again." Then she stepped forward and gave me a quick, firm hug. It wasn't romantic or charged with tension. It was purely human. Her head rested on my shoulder for just a moment, and I put my arms around her, holding her steady. It was the kind of hug that communicates more than words ever could. When we pulled apart, she whispered, "Good night." And then she was gone, disappearing down the empty hall. I stood there for a long moment in the quiet of my classroom, still feeling the warmth of that brief embrace. And I realized something had fundamentally changed. I didn't get much work done that evening, not because I was distracted by grading, I wasn't, but because I was aware that Clara was going home to a life that was breaking her spirit, aware of the immense weight she was carrying, and aware that this wasn't just a colleague having a bad day. This was a woman whose world was quietly imploding, and for reasons she might not fully grasp, she had chosen my classroom as her sanctuary. The walls of my own apartment felt different that night, the silence more pronounced, and my thoughts refused to settle. I kept replaying the hug in my mind. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not dramatic, just deeply, honestly human. It was the kind of embrace you don't easily forget, not because of what it might lead to, but because of how profoundly necessary it felt in that moment. When the sky finally began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I got out of bed. The apartment was still. I moved with a deliberate slowness, not wanting to disturb the quiet of the morning. I brewed a pot of strong coffee and stood by the kitchen window, cupping the warm mug in both hands, watching the soft light spill over the distant Wasatch Mountains. About 20 minutes after I arrived at school, I heard her footsteps in the hallway, soft and cautious, as if she were unsure of her welcome. She appeared in my doorway, wrapped in a thick cardigan that looked immensely comfortable. Her hair was down, slightly wavy, and her expression was calm but deeply tired. She was still beautiful, but in a way that was more raw and real than the polished version of her I was used to seeing. "Morning," she said quietly. "Hey," I replied with a small smile. I was just about to make a coffee run. "Want one?" She nodded, stepping fully into the classroom and taking the mug of coffee I offered her from my own thermos. We stood there for a few minutes, not speaking, just sipping. There was something about that shared silence. It wasn't awkward at all. It was restful. Eventually, she sat down at the student desk, pulling the cardigan tighter around herself. She stared out the window for a long moment, then said, "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing." I took the seat across from her. "I don't think you're supposed to, Clara. You're just figuring things out one moment at a time. That's more than enough." She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about how it felt yesterday, just sitting in here, being quiet. It felt normal. Like I got a tiny piece of myself back." Then she looked directly at me. Her eyes held something new, not romance, not confusion, just a profound depth. "Paul and we're not really a couple anymore. We live in the same house. We share a life on paper, but emotionally, we're just two strangers coexisting in the same space. I didn't even realize how hollowed out I'd become until I walked out of that house last night." I listened, not interrupting. I could tell she needed to articulate this, to give voice to the realization. "I came here yesterday because I couldn't stand the pretense anymore, and now I don't want to go back to being that person." She stayed for the rest of my planning period. We didn't make a plan for it. She just stayed. I made us both another cup of coffee with the small machine I kept in my storage closet. She helped me sort a stack of student journals, laughing when she read a particularly dramatic entry about teenage heartbreak. At one point, we took a walk around the school's empty running track during the lunch break, just a slow, casual loop under the grey sky. We didn't hold hands, but our shoulders brushed a few times, a small point of contact that neither of us acknowledged. The day unfolded gently, a series of quiet moments shared between the bells. That evening, after we had both stayed late to finish up our work, I was about to leave when she appeared at my door again. "I was thinking of grabbing a bite to eat," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes betraying her nervousness. "I don't really want to go home yet. Would you want to join me?" We ended up at a small, quiet diner a few miles from the school. We sat in a booth by the window, the low light and the soft clatter of silverware creating a bubble of privacy around us. A nature documentary was playing on the small TV above the counter, but we weren't really watching it. Then quietly, she said, "It's strange. I feel a sense of peace right now, like I'm allowed to just exist. I haven't felt that in years." I turned to her. "You don't have to rush anything. There's no playbook for this." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for something. Permission, maybe, or just understanding. "Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel bad about being here with you?" she asked. "No," I said gently. "I think you're doing what you need to do to survive. That's never wrong." Her head leaned just for a moment against my shoulder. I let her rest it there. My arm found its way around her, not in a forceful or suggestive way, but just as a steadying presence. And then something shifted. She looked up at me, our faces closer than they had ever been. Her gaze lingered on my lips. I could feel the warmth of her breath, and slowly, with a tangible hesitation, she leaned in. Her lips met mine, soft and careful, like a question she wasn't entirely sure she should be asking. The kiss lasted only a moment, nothing rushed, no fireworks, just a profound sense of connection between two people trying to feel something other than pain. She pulled back, her eyes wide. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to be," I replied, my voice quiet. We didn't kiss again. She leaned into my side again, this time resting her head against my chest, and we stayed like that for what felt like an hour, quiet and still. Something had changed, and neither of us dared to say it out loud. I think at the time, I didn't fully comprehend how deep the connection between us had already grown. In the beginning, we were just two people trying to navigate the unexpected circumstances we'd been handed. But as the days passed, something about the simplicity of our shared moments, those quiet coffees, the walk around the track, the peaceful silences, began to feel like something more, something undeniably real. It wasn't a sudden or dramatic transformation. It was a gradual evolution that began after that quiet night in the diner, after we shared that one kiss, so gentle and hesitant, it felt more like a question neither of us was ready to answer. We didn't immediately rush into some clandestine affair. In fact, after that night, we instinctively created a bit of distance, both of us needing time to process what had happened. But the space wasn't awkward or cold. It was respectful. Neither of us was prepared to dive into something so complicated so quickly. We both needed to proceed at our own pace. For the next few school days, Clara was polite but reserved. She was in her own house, both literally and figuratively, and I understood that. She needed to face her life, to clean out the emotional clutter, to sort through the history that lingered within those walls. But she still found reasons to stop by my classroom every day, sometimes with a question about a shared student, other times just to return a book. It was her way of checking in, of maintaining the connection. The weight of her situation was still there, heavy on her heart, but a quiet companionship was solidifying between us, one that didn't require grand gestures or overwhelming confessions. I'd have coffee ready in the mornings, and we'd sit for a few minutes before students arrived, sharing our thoughts in low voices. Sometimes she would look on the verge of tears. Other times she would laugh at some stupid anecdote I'd share, like the time I accidentally used a meme in a presentation to the school board, only realizing my mistake halfway through. I found myself smiling more, genuinely smiling. Something about her presence was slowly bringing a dormant part of me back to life. And in turn, she was changing too. I could see it clearly. Her eyes were no longer solely filled with sorrow. They were starting to hold a spark of something else, resolve, maybe even hope. Her smile began to appear more often, even if it was small at first. Her laughter, when it came, was less restrained. She started talking about things she had forgotten she enjoyed, like hiking in the canyons or trying out new recipes. Things she used to do before her relationship had shrunk her world. I could see her rediscovering herself, piece by piece. It was not a fast or easy process, but with each quiet conversation, each shared moment between classes, I could tell that she was healing. Not completely. That kind of emotional wound doesn't work like that, but she was learning to live alongside it. As time went on, I realized that in my own way, I was learning how to do the same. Then, one Friday, about a month after she found the letter in my locker, she asked if she could talk to me after school. There was a new determination in her voice. We met in my classroom, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows. She told me she had finally done it. She had told Paul it was over. The conversation had been awful. She said, full of anger and confusion on his part. But she had held her ground. She was moving out, staying with a friend until she could find her own apartment. It was a monumental step, and I could feel a knot of admiration and concern tighten in my stomach. Her old life, the one she had known for nearly a decade, was officially over. But she had asked to see me, and this time it felt different. It felt like a deliberate step forward. That night she invited me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant, a place she said she'd always wanted to try. We were meeting not as colleagues, but as two people on the cusp of something new. We ate outside on a small patio as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The evening air was cool, the kind of night where you can just sit back and feel the world settling around you. We didn't talk much about her breakup during dinner. We didn't need to. The conversation was easy and comfortable, as if we had been doing this for years. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the soft sound of clinking forks, the quiet hum of the city, and the frequent glances we shared when one of us said something that made the other laugh. As the night stretched on, the sky darkened, and the soft glow from the string lights on the patio cast a warm light between us. That's when she looked at me, and her expression was different from any I had seen before. There was no sadness in her eyes anymore, no uncertainty. There was something steady, something sure. "I think I'm ready," she said, her voice clear in the quiet evening. "Ready for what?" I asked, my heart beating a little faster. "Ready to let myself start over. I've been stuck for so long, Leo, and I didn't know how to get out of it. But being with you helped me see that it's okay to want more, that I don't have to be defined by what I've lost." Her words hit me with a force I hadn't anticipated. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just reached across the table and took her hand in mine. It felt right, completely natural. I didn't need to say anything back. She knew I understood. I knew too. She smiled then, a real, open, brilliant smile, and I realized just how far she had come in such a short time. This wasn't just about her getting over a bad relationship anymore. It was about her finding something new, something unexpected, but something profoundly good. "I don't want to rush into anything," she continued, her thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "But when I imagine my future now, you're in it. And that means something to me." It was my turn to smile, a wide, genuine smile that came from a place of deep relief and happiness. "I don't want to rush either," I said softly. "We can take all the time in the world, but I want to be there with you, Clara. I think we both deserve that." The silence that followed wasn't heavy or uncertain. It was filled with a complete and mutual understanding. There were no more questions to ask, just a shared certainty that whatever was coming next, we would face it together. From that night on, things were different. We didn't dive into a whirlwind romance. We didn't have to. We took our time, building on the foundation of friendship we'd already laid. We still had our quiet mornings and long evenings talking, but now we also went on hikes, explored bookstores, and cooked dinner together in her new, small apartment. We reveled in the simplicity of true companionship, and as the days turned into weeks, we found ourselves leaning on each other more and more. We didn't rush, but slowly. Surely, we both realized we had found something real, something worth protecting. A few months later, after countless shared meals and quiet nights, I found myself waking up next to her more often than not. It wasn't the loud, chaotic kind of love you read about in novels. It was the kind that felt steady and true, built not on grand gestures, but on the small, everyday moments of shared support and quiet understanding. I was happy, truly happy, and so was she. And that's how I knew this was the right kind of story, the kind where two people find a way to move forward, not by forgetting the past, but by refusing to let it define their future. And just like that, what started with a misplaced letter was no longer a story about loneliness. It had become a story about healing, about second chances, and about finding love in the most unexpected of places,